Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Williamson, and I'm the chair of the newly formed Marcomms PRCA Group. Delighted to welcome you this morning to this session, our first outing as a Marcomms Group. When we created the vision for this group, we wanted it to be truly inclusive, and that means delivering sessions that are insightful for both agency and client side folk, from the CEO to the account exec. And so we're very keen that everything we do is interactive, that we encourage you to participate with questions and comments to ensure that you get the best value from the time we spend together. So I would encourage you to post any questions in the chat function, and we will pick those up as we move along through today. Just so you're aware, we will be recording this session. We're also going to write a blog from the findings. Each of the speakers has very kindly offered to give us their words of wisdom in 5 top tips. We'll share those too. And we will also Mark has very kindly offered to write an article in the forthcoming issue of Just Marketing. So there'll be lots of ways for you to be able to access the findings from this session. Special thank you to Francis, our Director General, for moderating this session, and of course to our speakers who, as I've noted in all of my LinkedIn posts, are a stellar group of individuals. Francis, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to everybody for joining us. I just wanted to say it's great to see this event taking place. It's one of many events that our groups are putting on at the moment. There are several every week, so I'd encourage you to take advantage of them, attend them. They're all free. One general comment before I introduce the panelists, if that's okay. These are obviously very difficult times for all of us and so on and so forth. But one of the great things that I've seen over the last few months is the willingness of people to share insight, even for rivals to share insight with one another. And that's been a really positive development and something that I hope sticks around when we are in better times. So our panelists today, we've got Kerry Treville, who's the interim CEO at the British Promotional Merchandise Association, Chris Fiorillo, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at Infosys Consulting, Nick Jones, the Group Marketing Director at International SOS, very appropriate to have him on the panel today, and Chris Hall, partner at Shallcross Partners Limited. And as Paul mentioned, we have Mark Johnson, the editor of Just Marketing, who'll be writing up some of the content, I imagine. So the format today is we have 2 presentations followed by questions and discussion, and please do throw your questions in. And then 2 further presentations, again followed by questions and discussion, wrapping up. And as Paul said, people have very kindly agreed to circulate their words of wisdom. So first off, we're addressing the challenges in pitching the value of marketing to the board. Pretty important topic, I'm sure we'd all agree right now. And our first presenter is Chris Fiorillo. So Chris, over to you.
Good. Thanks a lot, Francis, for the nice introduction. Thanks for having me, guys, and thanks everyone for attending today. So, value of marketing to the board during extreme, challenging times, transformative times that we're in. Really a tough task for us to really earn our keep in these days, huh? So, you know, I think there's maybe 4 or 5 key principles that I've instituted over the past month since kind of the crisis started, and budgets have been really questioned and challenged across all parts of the organization. Marketing, of course, is sometimes perceived as a discretionary spend part of many companies. So CFO's eyes kind of perk up often, right, when they know they need to kind of trim costs or reduce overhead. And marketing is obviously an area that they can quickly zoom into. So I knew that was coming and had to be proactive on a couple of fronts to try to preserve budgets and to continue to show value during these last months when everyone has been challenged to grow the top line, preserve the bottom line. So a couple of things that have worked well for me in my business. I'm on the B2B side, do a lot of content marketing. PR communications is a big aspect of what I do from a marketing perspective. So there are a lot of costs tied into my team and organization with external spend. And so I need to really justify this stuff more and better than ever in a smart way to kind of keep as much of this intact. So a couple of things that work well for me, and certainly consider this in your areas. Look forward to any thoughts or questions you guys may have. I think it's really important. It's obvious, but really understand your clients, your business, how the organization sells and prices itself, and be able to have rich conversations around account growth, right? Business growth. Those topics are more critical than ever at the board level. That's really what they want to know right now. How are we going to grow and keep our top line steady, and keep kind of the business running? So be really in tune with the business narrative. So for example, if your CEO is really top line growth oriented, have your marketing narrative be totally focused around that. So what I mean is topics like lead generation, new customers, acquisition, client engagement. These topics are absolutely king. You can almost minimize everything else if your CEO's top priority is just pure revenue growth. On the other hand, if profitability or operating margin is really the board focus, shift your narrative as a marketing person to that a bit more. And what I mean is the board's attention around profitability might be looking at how can we do things more efficiently as an organization? How can we do more for less? Can we outsource some things? Can we do things more creatively? I think if you change the tone in the narrative around those things that help show them that you really are in tune with profitability and margin, those kind of things, that's a really good thing to just show you really get it from a marketing perspective and are tying your initiatives into what the board is really looking to drive. So one, it's obvious, but show a really deep understanding of the business and the climate we're in, I think is a good first principle that I know has worked well for me. Second one, get basic. I know at the board level, sometimes they love to geek out and see all kinds of detailed operating metrics, marketing metrics, KPIs, all that kind of stuff. The reality is most of them don't understand a lot of that stuff very well. And in these extreme times, topics like growth and profitability that I just mentioned, that's really all they're in tune with and all their ears are perking up against. So relating to the board in their terms, keeping it very simple, keeping it very basic as well right now, I think is something that also has helped me connect with them during these moments. Third point, get out of the marketing bubble a little bit. And what I mean by that is building alliances, especially in difficult times, really critical. Alliances in the business, alliances with another board member. One that's worked really great for me, because I am a cost center with a lot of costs, being a good, close ally with the CFO, really important. Being deeply connected, being proactive with him or her, not trying to hide costs or shift things around, because they'll find everything. And often the CFO in many organizations does look at marketing as a cost center and an easy area to reduce overhead. So I think by being proactive, getting out of just that marketing bubble and ecosystem, building alliances across the broader board, especially with someone like the CFO who really controls the funds and the purse strings, really, really important. And I know that's at least, it hasn't solved all of my problems, but it's helped me minimize some of the cuts or some of the budget challenges I've had to face. And she's been able to shift things over to other parts of the organization and help me preserve some of the good work we're doing in marketing. Fourth point, showcase a board member. I love, even in good times, but especially in challenging times, really partnering with them. Back to my alliances topic, putting a little campaign or initiative or something together that makes them look really, really good during a difficult time. It makes others want to get involved. And if you can build some groundswell where one of their teammates is looking really good, they want to get in on the action as well. And they're going to come to you as marketing to help support them. That's just kind of a clever way of really showing the value of marketing, truthfully, even if tactically, in keeping some momentum going and keeping a positive narrative out there across the board. my last point, it's a simple one as well, but there's many ways to keep visible, even when budgets are tight, when projects are tight. And I think keeping strong visibility for yourself as leaders or team members, really, really important. It's obvious, but there's always things to do that can keep marketing front and center, and kind of in the pole position or center of influence, even when projects are scaled back, even when budgets are challenged. Look at redeploying people in your team, hopefully people you've still been able to keep. Redeploy people into other initiatives, maybe things in the past that got overlooked or deprioritized. For me, I've started sort of a data cleansing CRM capability building task right now, which just seems to always get overtaken by other priorities. So I've been able to kind of shift people into other areas that has helped keep things going, and keep other initiatives going, keeping us front and center, doing maybe a bit more internal communications, a bit more marketing, self-promotion, kind of beating the chest a little bit to kind of show, even if we don't have as much going on as in good times or in normal times, there still is a lot of great activity, and it keeps marketing kind of top of mind and very visible. So those are really my 4 or 5 things that I think have resonated well in my organization, and I think helped me connect with the board and show value. Just to summarize, deep understanding with the business, really being in tune with the narrative of today, getting basic and just really connecting with those leaders in very simple terms that they'll understand. Get out of the marketing bubble, build strong alliances, try to showcase a board member to build some momentum and create visibility across that management team. And then keep visible, even when projects are reduced, there's a lot of ways to kind of showcase all the good work you guys, I'm sure, do within your teams. Don't be shy, beat your chest, promote the heck out of what you guys do, because it's a critical function and it's going to come back, and we'll be in good times again, at some point soon. So, and the organizations will need you and all the good work we're accustomed to doing. So those are my 5 key areas. I'll kind of leave it there for any questions, comments. Look forward to your feedback as we move on.
That was great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. So we're going to go to Chris Hall now, and then some questions and comments about the 2 presentations and a bit of discussion before our further 2 panelists. Chris.
Thank you, Francis. I have to say that I agree an awful lot with what the first Chris said there in terms of the key priorities. So for those of you that, probably most of you who have not met me before, my name's Chris Hall. I've had 30 years business to business, pharmaceutical industry experience. The pharmaceutical companies have been our customers worldwide. I've had strategic and operational board accountability for marketing for 20 years. I'm probably the only person on this call who has absolutely no marketing qualifications. But I have had a lot of experience of representing marketing at that level. And I completely concur with what Chris said about keeping it simple. Many of the people around the board table don't have marketing experience. So my thoughts on demonstrating marketing to the board: firstly, don't hide. You're in the P&L account. You're a greater or lesser part of that. You need to be proactive. They will find you. Absolutely, without question, they will find you, no matter where you are in the organization. Don't hide. The big picture, the strategy for the board probably remains the same, but what's changing here is the tactics. Usually in a crisis, this means costs down, but nobody ever cut their way to greatness in a business, or even cut their way to survival. Usually this is primarily a cash flow issue. Or people are seeing it now as a cash flow issue, and you need to be conscious that the cash flow impact of what you're proposing is a large part of how it will be judged. The second reaction after how do we preserve the cash flow is going to be what's the growth? How do we grow in the changed environment? And that really is marketing's responsibility to produce the plan for that. How are you going to grow in this changed environment? I'd make one point about the change. People's boards' time horizons shrink dramatically in a time of in a time of crisis. The external environment is changing extremely quickly. So what was a great idea and communications objective 10 days ago, as people start to come out of lockdown in various speeds in various parts of the world, that external environment is changing very quickly. So having a plan for what you might do in 8 weeks' time is much less valuable for what you might do at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So speed is absolutely of the essence here. How do you take what's happening now, communicate the essential parts of that? And I would suggest that now is the time for 80% right and fast rather than perfectionist. And I know that some that hurts for some people and some characteristics, but really that I think is a key element. Completely concur with what Chris said about identification and alignment with the board's spoken and unspoken objectives. Primarily, you get to this by asking the right questions in the right environment, and you need to really listen to what they're saying. You know, they're in a situation where they've never been before. They have personal objectives, they have business objectives, and they're going to want to come out of this in the best possible way as a company, as a board, and as individuals. I agree completely with understanding the whole business dynamics. Don't think of this as a marketing issue. This is a business challenge. Be very, very careful about the assumptions that you make, and make sure you list them and you're clear on what the assumptions you're making are when you're presenting to the board. In my world, in B2B marketing, it's really, really important to align with the other stakeholders in the business. And this isn't just the other board members. This is, you need people in the organization to be saying, I can't do my job properly. I can't deliver what I've promised unless marketing are doing their bit. And in business to business environment, I've found that the sales and business development groups are extremely powerful in this. They're being held accountable for the sales growth and the budgets on the top line, and they need to be saying to the board in parallel to you, these guys need to have the tools to do the job in order to be able to get it done. So alignment with other groups is important, but I would specifically suggest sales and business development need to be your most enthusiastic supporters of your approach and what you're doing. In moments of crisis, you need to grab the opportunities that the change creates. You know, if you take this current example in a business to business environment, we've got key customer decision makers are working from home. They've got increased time. They're more accessible than they've ever been. They're not on planes. They're not in endless meetings. There might be an endless Zoom calls, but they're not in endless meetings. And there's a massive reduction in the advertising and commercial activities of many of your competitors. You can see this in the statistics around reductions in advertising spend. You know, I'm not on the B2C side, but there are more people sitting in front of the television for more time now than there have been in the last 10 years. And the advertising spend has been absolutely decimated. So, you know, what's the opportunity that white space creates? I think really it's the marketing department's opportunity to shine here. It's your time. You need to take it and show them what you're capable of doing in a really dramatically, quickly changing situation. So I think really in terms of a practical level, you know, what do you need to do? You need to be giving the board options. You know, what's the change? What's the impact of that change? What's the future vision? And what's the plan to deliver that? I like to go into these conversations with really giving the board options. You know, don't go in there and say, this is what we have to do. You can go in there and say, this is what we can do, and this is the likely outcome with our current budget. This is what we would do if we had 50% of our current budget, and this is the likely outcome. And this is what we could do if you repurposed some resource from somewhere else and gave us 150% of what we've currently got. I think also be really clear about what the flexibility is in your plan. There's a very big difference at the moment between fixed cost and variable cost, and you need to understand that. So if you do a piece of work with an agency outside, then you get that executed and delivered, and you pay for that 60 or 90 days later. So from a cash flow point of view, that's quite important. And if you furlough staff, you get those costs paid pretty much in the month. So think about the cash flow impacts of what you're doing. Be brave. Think about it from their perspective. What would you do in their situation? Make a very clear recommendation to them. And if that recommendation is to furlough some costs, to outsource some costs, then be very clear about that to your recommendation, but make them make a decision. So put them in a situation where these are the options. This is our recommendation. Yes, no. And as I say, if you were in their shoes, what would you do? Is a really good question to ask yourself just before you pitch it. I'd like to finish with a quotation from Albert Camus. Where there is no hope, it's incumbent on us to invent it. And I think that really is the role of marketing in these types of situations. So I'll leave it there and look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Chris. The invention of hope. Well, I guess we could all use that, couldn't we?
Exactly.
So we've got a question from Paul for everyone. How do you calculate the cost of the lost opportunity? So that's an easy one to start off with.
Well, I'll have a stab at it, huh? Maybe back what Chris Hall said. I think the board, especially during these kind of times, they love having options, right? And showing them, if we do this, this will result. If we don't do this, this will result, or this will be the lost opportunity of this in the future, right? And a lot of decisions today too, right, are going to have a residual impact. If we slash budgets or don't invest to a minimum standard, they will impact the brand and our capabilities and our revenue driving programs longer term. So I think trying to make up some kind of dramatic numbers the best you can and show stuff in a, let's just say, a slightly dramatic way sometimes catches people's attention. And I think if you can show that in a series of kind of very simple options, that's sometimes worked well for me. Tough question though, good question. Yeah.
I would say that in the markets I've been involved in, where you're involved in long-term pharmaceutical development, it's really about the value of the commercial pipeline that you've got. So if you see increase or decrease in your pipeline value, that's going to happen maybe 2 or 3 years before the impact on the P&L. So historically, we've tended to measure opportunity captured or opportunity lost on the basis of pipeline growth. But I think that's quite a specific example.
I think it might be also worth just thinking about the lost opportunity that might not just be in this financial year, it may be in future years. So particularly if these are repeating costs or opportunities in your business. And I think this is the time where it's going to be really hard to sit there and look 2 years ahead. However, it's going to be really important to say, is it an opportunity lost forever? Is it something that's ever going to come back, and will it actually come back in the strength that you've had in the last year? The moment we're estimating that some of the recovery will be quite late into 2021, and we might just about get back up to 2019 levels, but we're probably still going to be 16% down on those kind of revenues. So when you're thinking about that lost opportunity, and I think I was going to say the two Chris's, and don't want this to refer to you that way, but the two Chris's are absolutely right. It's having a look at how you understand that and how you translate that to the board to say, is it lost forever? what does it look like in the future? Because if that opportunity is lost completely, is there something that will take its place? Or is the reshape, is there another opportunity that could come from what has been lost that just looks different in this new environment that we're in?
So we've got a question to everyone. In general, is there a balance of assertive or passive approaches that people take when approaching the board, being too pushy or too willing to accept cuts? And does the board tend to understand the proper remit of marketing?
Who wants to take that one?
They're too pushy or too easy?
Well, I'll start with that. I think I tend to try to avoid being pushy, but I do, as I said, make options clear and the consequences of those choices clear, and then make a recommendation. I wouldn't get to the point of saying, I'd never get to the point of saying this is the only way, because it isn't. They'll find somebody else who has more choices than you if you take that approach, in my experience.
I would add that it's not just the aggressive approach, it's also the subtler technique that works. So we do a lot of internal communication. So we do our own internal PR around success factors during times like this, but at all times. So you may be feeling like you're spamming certain inboxes, etc., but this might be your only opportunity, especially if you can do it in a nice, clear, summated way, much like the Chris has pointed out, like go straight to the point of what they're most interested in and connect back what you've been doing each time. So my board is most interested in, because we're a for-profit company, they're most interested in new business. So the things which we do, whether they're PR, brand awareness, through to actually direct marketing, is we link that immediately at the top of everything we share internally with the board.
Sorry.
I was going to say, Francis, I think that also there's that and Chris Fiorillo mentioned this to start off with, the stakeholders on your board. And if your board member is particularly responsible for one area in your business and you really need to get them on board, some of that subtle pitching behind the background, as Nick's saying, that subtle bit of PR is going to be really important to help them take on journeys. There's no surprises in the board meeting. You don't want to rock up and say, ta-da, we've got this amazing plan. Everybody looks with that surprise face they're trying to hide. So I think it's a really important aspect to make sure that those who are speaking are understanding and with you on that journey.
So we've got a question from Peter D to both Chris's. You're like a double act here. Linking your activity to CEO's goals is smart, but time's critical. So when management are reluctant or slow to make decisions and the landscape is changing so quickly, how do you reevaluate your activity and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I think one of the principles I operate my team and area on is being agile, very responsive to the business, very responsive in real time to a new client opportunity, a new pitch, or the changing market conditions. And I think in a lot of cases, this whole situation has made a lot of CEOs and boards confused, right? And not exactly sure how to act. Some clearly acted very quick and decisively if they had the right answers or confidence, right? But many don't have all the answers, and that's not a bad thing. But I think if you can show your own agility and be proactive and make changes and adapt, even while bigger decisions are happening, I think it positions you well and maybe a bit ahead of the curve. I know in my organization that the finance function is quite powerful. In a lot of companies, the CFO has a lot of hand. They're usually not very long-term minded when it comes to managing the books and costs. So staying linked, what I mentioned earlier, staying linked tightly with the CFO, they're often going to be extremely proactive because they have to do a lot of kind of forecasting and remodeling, and they want to know where costs and investments are going to sit and when those are going to hit the book. So I think just keeping that agility and being proactive is my best answer to that.
I think I would add to that. I think that is very important. I think if you're getting into a situation where you're stuck and you can't move forward because they won't make a decision, I'm not recommending this. Clearly, I'm not recommending this. What I have done in the past is to lay out the choice and say, if I don't hear from you, this is what I'm going to do, and apologize later. It depends on the dynamics in the specific company as to whether that's the right approach.
Yeah,
assumed consent.
Yeah, that's a brave attitude, but I've adopted it myself and plenty of times. Chris F., you talk about the importance of the relationship with the CFO, and I'm completely with you. What do you do if the CFO really doesn't believe in the value that marketing brings? As in, if he's not on your side. I see the benefit he's on your side. Yeah. What about if he's not?
You know, it's a good question, and I don't know if many CFOs see that, even my own company CFO. We're allies, and I have her on my side, but I don't know. I think in a perfect world, if she could take all these costs and put it somewhere else into the business, she would love to. So that's a tough question. I think it gets back to what I mentioned in my little overview earlier of, you know, finding allies and ambassadors where you can have small programs, initiatives that are really linked to people on the front lines that are driving client activities, and you can constantly just showcase and use them to showcase things for you. Sometimes when it's only us in marketing beating our own chest or self-promoting, you know, a CFO can see through that sometimes, right? And I think if you can get other people in your team or a sponsor on the board or a key business stakeholder dealing with frontline client commercial activity to say, hey, that guy, that marketing team, I cannot live without them. Get them to say, get someone else to objectively endorse you or subjectively endorse you to say and to cascade that they cannot live and operate without you because you do several things that are critically important to their success. That's maybe my guidance on that topic.
Can I just add to that? One of the other ones is to align with what the CFO can get from marketing, particularly if you're a public company. Every 90 days, these guys have to stand up in front of the shareholders, and they want to look good when they do that. They want to have real business examples when they do that, and they want them to be presented in a way that transmits the value to the shareholders, which may not be the same as the way you would communicate them to the customer. So I've found that if you can be giving them the tools to make them look good every 90 days on the back of what you're doing for the sales and the business development force, that's very powerful. And I think that they're when they use the tools that you're providing and they see the value that brings, that really helps. The other thing is, if you're not a public company, these guys are still pitching the business to banks and to their external contacts, and they have a different agenda to the sales guy selling to customers. So make sure they've got the tools to be able to do that, and that those tools adjust and adapt as the situation changes as it is now. And they'll see the insights that the business insights that you're bringing that they can use in front of their stakeholders.
Well, this is a kind of link. So we had a question from Kerry Worrell saying, if you're a small team, it can be really hard to link activity directly to P&L. So any tips on that would be appreciated.
I'm happy to go. I feel your pain. I've done it both with small teams and big teams. And actually, to be honest, sometimes big teams are harder to even manage and report in the same way. So you just have like this flexible. So sometimes I wish I had a smaller team. I think I'm just going to assume you're working in a commercial environment, but I guess you could find and replace commercial profit for whatever the measure of success is for your organization. I think my first recommendation, assuming it's commercial for profit, is get close to your sales if you're not already close to them. You need to understand, or they need to understand your value to them, and you need to agree quite quickly on what that value is. So if I just take a very simple example of running an event, and this could be something you're doing right now, virtually, like like this, or it could be something you've done in the past that you just need to close and report on. So for example, in an event, you should have people attending them, and after the event or towards the end of the event, you should be checking to see whether they want to speak to someone from sales about the service you've just discussed, or the story you've just discussed, which subtly links to the service which you're trying to sell. Then you hand that data to the contact data to your salespeople, and then you hound those salespeople to make sure they followed up with them. And actually, we've gone as far as actually following up directly with those contacts ourselves when our sales have not been able to do it, which goes back to one of the Chris's was talking about expanding your remit a little. But then you should really watch those contacts when you hand them to sales. That's the real key, and I think the difference we're seeing now, at least in the B2B market, but has been there for probably B2C for a long time, or in the consumer world, is we're actually tracking all the way through to the closed one that contact at that event may have brought. And that is literally can be done on an Excel spreadsheet, or it can be done on something sophisticated like a marketing automation tool.
I think those engagement points are absolutely critical in how they're tracked, because I think at the moment the sales team, all of their targets have probably been ripped up and chucked in the bin. So particularly if you do have a sales team involved in it, and they are, as Nick said, you're going to hand those people over very carefully, please look after them. Possibly the framework they normally operate in might be very different. And so when you look at those points of value across the team, is like if they don't understand the true benefit of exactly what that lifetime connection is going to be with that new customer, it might be quite hard to prove the benefit. But I think we found that a lot with sales teams who are floundering a little bit because they don't quite know what to do with themselves. And I think in some of those small team environments, if you have one person centrally for sales, for example, in a small team, resetting their framework of exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and maybe giving them some new soft targets of how they interact in some of these new environments is really critical, because otherwise they might lose their way and everybody might not quite understand how to link them together, back those touch points. But I thoroughly agree with what Nick's saying. A really simple track and trace of exactly how people are behaving, what's happened. It's all going to be quite short term at this point, but when you look to long term, how are they going to be behaving? You want to make sure you're keeping in contact with them and keeping that value fresh in their eyes for longer than just this immediate crisis period as well.
So we have another question from Samantha Curtin, who says, what about if you're working in an outsourced PR agency? You can be pretty removed from the sales team. So what's going to make the board appreciate your value? Very relevant question right now for lots of agencies.
My take on that would be positive, be proactive, don't wait to be asked. So if you've been working on a set of projects or a set of deliverables for a client, is there something that, given this changed environment, you could put on the table for them that will make them stop and pause and think, okay, maybe we should think about how to do this. And I think you need to get onto the front foot and not just execute the plans. You still need to execute, obviously, but try and get onto the front foot and be innovative and creative is probably the best I can say to that.
Yeah, I would just add to self-promotion, right? I think now's the time to put some of those nice summary decks together, put a nice kind of collage together of each of the people you've gotten out there and featured in the media. I've done that for some of my own frontline guys to help justify keeping more of my PR budget intact. So self-promotion, showcasing everything that you've done over the past year, trying to cascade that across your client organization would be a good tip.
I think from my perspective, I would welcome if our agency asked us to see how we're reporting internally to the board and what our techniques we're employing. And my socks would be blown off if they came back to me with suggestions on how that could be improved. And I bet you bottom dollar it can be improved. So it means switching off perhaps maybe the more traditional activities you may had in plan, or the things you really enjoy, actually media outreach, and actually focusing on what truly makes your current account fly.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be important for if you're a PR team, I think, because having worked with lots of PR agencies and stuff over the years, that proactivity is always there. You know, everyone's always knocking on your door with great ideas. I think at the moment there are channels that are more available to us, a bit like Zoom. So we all understand, I know I've got Slack, Zoom, webinars, I've got things come over. Trying to work out what is the most effective way to talk to that audience in the context that's going to be best for your brand or service is really important. And I think, again, it comes back to the sales team. Maybe not, you know, this is going to be, some of it's going to be new to them. They won't understand the best way to make the best of it. And I've seen some really interesting parts where maybe we could all be forgiven for not delivering the slickest presentation, but this is going to be part of our lives to come. So how can we embrace some of the technology to really make it work for everyone? So I think some of those suggestions of that extra creativity that's going to come at it from a totally different angle from the sales team, I think, you know, again, agree with Nick here and the Chris, is that this is an opportunity to really show how you can flip things over and demonstrate an enormous amount of value to say, have you thought about doing it this way? Because actually you can use this medium to get this type of result from the audience. So I think that's a really important thing, because so many people actually maybe haven't said, I don't really get how all of this stuff works. And I really could do with some help showing how to make the most of it.
I think that was a great first session. So it seems we're about halfway through. So we ought to go to the second group of presentations. And thank you to Chris and Chris. That was fantastic. I particularly agree with you about finding enthusiastic supporters, and that there's nowhere to hide, so you might as well be proactive about it. So section 2, it's on how marketing professionals can demonstrate their value in-house, and it's over to Kerry.
So I have the great pleasure of representing a trade organisation. So I'm representing about 500 different companies, all doing very slightly different jobs from some of the people on the call today. But I've also run agencies in my time and been in everyone's shoes. And I think it's understanding now how we start to look at what we're going to do moving forward. So I think probably like most of you, I started my year with a great big plan. It was really audacious, had lots of goals, and my team was there. I've recently taken over as CEO, and probably I took over a week before lockdown. So I tore up the plan that I had, I popped it in the bin, and we all ran around and we looked at everything that we were supposed to be doing at that point in time. And I think where we're looking at a lot of the businesses that I'm working with at the moment, they've almost gone through, it's going to sound a bit strange, almost a bit like a grieving process. They've had to rethink their model and their marketing agility to say, actually, I've kind of almost got to put that bit down and refocus on what I think I ought to be doing moving ahead. But I think taking your teams into your confidence as well about what we believe is going to work and collectively has been really important. I think what we're seeing with where a lot of companies have furloughed some essential roles and only kept some others, that's been quite disruptive to what that marketing now means internally within the team. It may be quite disjointed. So keeping in touch with your teams at this point is going to be really important. So I think agility, we've already talked about agility already this morning. That agile roadmap is going to really help people understand the foundations, the new framework that you might have to operate in. I think one of the most scary things that I have heard about sales and marketing within businesses recently is, well, they're not going out on the road anymore. We don't really need those people. Why do we even need marketing? That was absolutely made, it was a bit like, I don't think this is not what we want to hear. What we do need to understand is that those salespeople, and I mentioned it earlier, their framework has changed, and the sales and marketing framework, and we've shifted it. And so we now need to reframe what that's going to be. In preparation for today's session, there's been a lot of conversation about actually how quick we need to be out of the mark. And I think understanding those tactics that we can start to employ that are fast and also deliver results and are something that you can track are going to be really important. I mentioned earlier that the fact that you need to understand that some of your clients will be working in mediums they don't really understand. They don't know how to get the best out of them. How can you help them get to that point? And equally, how can you start to employ some of those tactics yourselves to demonstrate to your clients how effective it can be? So some new things that we're all going to have to get used to, because life is going to be like this probably for a little while. I don't know anyone who's been into London recently, but the parks are pretty full, but the offices are not necessarily full. So the back to work is going to be slow. And I think clients' attention is there. So one of the other areas that I think has been important is how we demonstrate, looking at maybe one central area in your business that's going to provide some focus internally. Maybe it's time for training. I think we've got this opportunity, rarely, that we probably, some of the distractions have gone away. Chris, if you mentioned about the CRM project that you're doing, I know that we're undertaking a big one at the BPMA at the moment, because we've said, actually, there's no other time we're going to be able to do this again. So how do you improve and come back leaner, meaner, and understanding exactly what customers are doing? And those evaluations that maybe you've not had a chance to look at in the detail, where can you come back with further information? But also that focus on purpose as well. So, there might have been all sorts of different things you've trimmed, but have you maybe re-examined the reason your business exists and that service, that value that you set out to offer in the first place? Where has that changed? Has something helped, or maybe led you astray? I think is probably the best way of putting it. In the last 18 months, we've had a very, very tough trading period over the last 4 or 5 years. 2019 was pretty good, maybe rebuilt, and we're possibly saying yes to all sorts of different things. Is there anything that's happened in the last few months that will help your teams refocus on the services that you deliver absolutely brilliantly? The other aspect of this is about some of those service-orientated causes that you have as well. So when you're thinking about that, the marketing scope within your business, how is that going to help you really deliver what you do as a company? Is there something that that your clients maybe don't understand about really why you're here, why you're getting out of bed in the morning? And also to understand how resilient you're going to be. So are you going to be here moving forward? What marketing communications can you also drive internally and externally to help your clients understand that you're here for the long haul and you're going to keep going no matter what? So it's a bit of a broad brush, because I think we've covered all sorts of different areas, but I think this internal framework of understanding that maybe your job role is still there, but it might just have a different end game between now and in the next few months as we start to move forward with the growth. Because growth is coming, and I've just come off an earlier call with the Advertising Association group that the BPMA is part of today. Advertisers are going to start spending again, and that impact on us, there will be work coming. It is starting to trickle through, and we need to make sure that we're ready as teams to help promote those services back to clients who know that you're open and ready for business.
Got to unmute myself, sorry.
Okay.
So that's a very optimistic note to end your comments on, and I would agree with you, growth is coming. I had an email this morning from a public sector body looking for agency support, and with a reasonably big budget, actually. And of all the members we have at the PRCA, the public sector are in the most financially robust position, yeah, and are looking to spend money again, which is good news for all of us, I think. So our final presentation of the day, Nick.
Thank you. And I must emphasize that everything that's been brought up so far, I completely wholeheartedly agree with. And although I'm going to give you probably an internal in-house perspective, I do think if you're on an agency side, it would be advantageous to understand those perspectives in order to redefine what you're doing, if that's what you need to do. Just a bit of background then. So I'm Group Marketing Director at a company called International SOS. If you don't know who we are, it's probably because you haven't had access to our services, but we're a B2B provider of health and security services around the world. What that means is about 11,000 companies on our books, completely spread out all over the world. And for their employees, we kind of cover any concerns around health and security, well-being, etc. So COVID-19 is really our bag, and we've been in the before it became a pandemic, and when it was just an infectious disease or point of concern in China in November, we've been there right at the beginning. So I've been through the journey of the pandemic and had to completely evolve strategy as we've gone through it. But I must say I probably come from the best educated, because I have 10,000 doctors and security experts within the organization, so I can call upon that expert advice at any time. From a Marcomms perspective, I have probably good news and bad news for you. The good news is, from my perspective at International SOS, we've definitely moved marketing from discretionary spend all the way through to kind of like a hard line item that is considered, especially during the pandemic, to lead the sales agenda. And I think we've led the sales agenda primarily because COVID-19 has been so newsworthy and has been something which we've been able to comment on the emerging trends very quickly and link back to our services. The bad news is if you're not currently measuring in the way I'm probably about to outline, it is a bit of a journey to get to that point. But I think in razor sharp focus, you can do it. And as we mentioned earlier, there are ways you don't need sophisticated tools to do it. You can still do it your traditional ways in measuring things on spreadsheets. So the first thing I would probably start off with is saying you need to define your story with the board going forward. And we already had in place before the pandemic a kind of agreement that we would spend 80% of our time on lead generative activities, and that would be measured against new business. And we don't even measure just on opportunities that come through. We actually measure on those opportunities that closed. So this is money in the bank for us. So I remember being asked to do that from our CCO and nearly falling off my chair and being like, well, I can do engagement rates on emails and I can give you coverage, but I can't tell you how much money. That's down to sales. But what they were trying to push was that partnership. And of course, what gets measured gets done. And now we have quite a considerable strength to that partnership. The other 20%, if you're wondering, is really around brand building and maybe some of those kind of internal tools, etc., capability building internally. But brand building, if I go down the kind of the PR route, is still really part of our overall sales funnel, because we may be talking about something now that we hope will come out into sales in a few years' time. So it really all does fit into the same bucket. And the other good news, I think, probably on defining your story and what you're sharing externally, is you all have the principles today of creating great stories that resonate with your clients, whether that's agency side or actually you're like me, commercially driven to drive sales from organizations. So those same principles of creating something that's newsworthy still stay today. What I've learned in the past, and I'm sure many of you have been through this, is there's no point chasing a rainbow where there isn't a pot of gold at the end of it. So I'm often given a list, and I think about my prioritization through the pandemic, I'm often given a list of things that are priorities for certain individuals within the organization. However, I have to then go through that list and maybe upset a few people by just working out which one might take me to the pot of gold in order for me to then go on to report on it. The other thing is around tools. So we spoke earlier on about how you may do this in a small environment by tracking attendees to an event like this and then following up with those attendees and passing on to sales, etc. There are ways to automate it, and that's why I think I probably erred on the kind of bad news. If you're not already got an automation suite in place, now is probably not the time to ask the budget for one. But if you do have one, there is a way to kind of pull these together so you've got measurement going pretty quickly. So we use Eloquent and Salesforce, and they literally just track engagement scores and contact data. So we're always capturing contact data in relation to interest for sales. And that passes through into our CRM tool, which we use Salesforce, and our salespeople use that. Now, the best part about automation, if I lost you there and talking about tools and data, and the best part about automation is you can kind of send something out and then let the system do it for you with then just monitoring and reporting. So for example, by putting the effort into this right now, I can go in on a minute-by-minute basis into our CRM tool and check how our marketing campaigns are doing in terms of closed won business every minute. And we're an international company, so deals are going across the line all the time. In terms of how we measure that, I mentioned closed won business, but we also now, as we're a B2B provider, we are now seeing how organizations who use our services are suffering as well. So they're looking at ways to demonstrate the value and why they need to keep us if they believe in keeping us. We obviously hope they do. So now my strategy is moving from more kind of making money from new services that protect people, now into kind of actually changing my strategy to work out how I can insist that our service is still so integral to keep with us. So I'm now looking at a measure that is around our renewal figures. And I know this from using our relationship management system. So I can track what we call a DNR rate, a do not renew rate, and link my performance to that as well. So again, I'm pivoting from doing nice engagement scores. I've pivoted to talking about like closed won new business, and now I'm talking about renewing and actually indeed extension. I think I really talked about how we report to the board, and we started off at the pandemic kind of reporting probably back in January when it became kind of truly an international health concern, and we were quite convinced it would start spreading, maybe not to this extent, but we were quite convinced it would get into a pandemic scenario. So we actually started by we simply send an email every week, and it used to be twice a week, but it's got less busy, so we've managed to get down to once a week, and we do a roundup of the top line figures, and then underneath is there for your accountants of the business. We do every single line item of what we've done and how it's performed. So that's attendant rates at attendee rates at events. That's coverage. Coverage is so important for us, especially when we've managed to capture the tier 1 world during this. And then my final point is, all of these performance measures are not just down to me as a marketing director. These are actually in every single person's performance objectives around the business who works in marketing. So we are measuring their performance based on these figures already, and we will continue to. And that is really like the final bit, really. That's not only just what you're measuring and sending to the board, but that is what you will then ensure is a transformation with your people. And much like myself, when I fell off the chair when CCO asked me to measure on closed won business, right, a few years ago, the same thing happened to our marketing people and our PR people. They've had to reshape how they've done things. And those ones who have evolved and reshaped have thrived. And those who haven't are just barely surviving. So I think I've ended on a negative. Sorry about that, Francis.
You're barely surviving, at least you're surviving.
Yeah.
So that's a quite remarkable commitment to measurement and a very welcome one. Paul's asked, if you don't have a CRM though, how do you continue to have the same belief in measuring what you do?
Could I possibly take that one? Because I've just had to do that report for my board, because I've got my CEO review on Friday morning, and I've just had to demonstrate engagement with a very broken CRM that I'm busy drop kicking out the window and putting a new one in at the moment. So I've got exactly that challenge. And so we've decided that we'd look at 5 key points of measurement, because we've 500 different companies that we're trying to engage with. We don't know quite how many staff are there. And so we're looking at all the things that we can track and measure. So that might be calls, number of emails, as Nick's saying, some really simple, straightforward things. And where are those touch points of engagement? And where are we getting that as a company or as an individual? So things like webinars and Zoom, these kind of interactions actually are relatively easy to track. You know who's registered, you know who's been attentive and what people have been doing. So lots of different things that you can bring that data in. It can be a bit of a headache, but I think this is probably where formulas and pivot tables become your friend in Excel, and you can get some quite quick results. Because again, when you're reporting back to your board, they don't want to know that Nick over there, he spent 10 minutes doing this, whatever. What they want to know is how many times he's interacted. Has that positive interaction gained anything further? So the report that I just did for my board last night was saying that this is where we are. We can also see where those points of maybe lack of interaction, or we're sending information out but we're not getting something back. Where do we focus our attention? And so there's been some quick ways, but I think it's rationalizing and probably simplifying what you need to do. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. You can still get a really, really good picture just by saying, actually, we'll keep to these core things, and then say to the board, look, what we've got is 50% of the people we're talking to are engaged. Look, that 10%, they really need more attention. We can see really quickly on these simple metrics what we need to go and focus our time on, because it doesn't have to be. I mean, I think that you also got access to things like HubSpot, which can be free. Those are usually useful tools that will integrate. So there are different tools out there, but it's yeah, spreadsheet can still be your friend. And if no one knows how to do pivot tables, they're really simple. I can do them. Everybody can. It'll give you some really quick answers on some of those simple track measurements.
And if it's of any use, we are big fans of the AMEC evaluation framework. It's on our website and their website, and it's free to download and use. I've got a question from Kat to our panelists. Have you ever been surprised or stunned? Stunned is a good word, by a board response to the agency in face of an urgent need, like the business plan for COVID, or the approach of an agency in advising the business? So surprise or being stunned, in a good or bad way, I suppose.
I think because I'm working with a very mixed board at the moment. I have a board of 12 who are all sorts of different businesses. But I'm also working externally with lots of agencies, different things. I've seen some two quite distinct things of behaviour. One, the people who've kind of gone to the mountains, they've gone to their bunker, they've put their head under the duvet, and they might have hidden. And they've just said, we're not coming back out until there's a vaccine. I had that conversation with someone who said, we're not doing anything until there's a vaccine. That's quite scary. Then the people just saying, it's fine, we can just carry on as normal. And there's the people who are sitting in the middle and saying, actually, we've done the firefighting piece. And we've now got to change that behaviour. And I think this is everyone's got into a pattern in the last few weeks. We talked a little bit about, that Zoom fatigue of how actually it's been very exhausting the last few months. And I think some of that has stopped some of the natural decision-making process that we're all used to. And I think it's been really useful to understand the boards with a simplified agenda is probably the best way to get to some faster decisions. But yeah, I have seen some very interesting things. That the going to ground part has been really quite crippling actually for some parts of the industry, where people are saying, actually, I'm knocking on your door really loud and there's no one there and you're not talking to me. And I think that sort of bit where there is growth, because this work, although work is massively reduced, work is still going on. I think, Francis, you mentioned some of those other public services, they need us at the moment. If we're not there, things will start to fail. So if we're not open for business and we're not demonstrating we're open for business, I think that's extremely damaging. And I would say that it's not for many companies, but I have seen a few that have done some very surprising moves. And I've got their clients telling me, I want to speak to them, but they're just not there. They're not communicating with me. So I'd say the communication strategy and really sticking your head above the parapet at the moment is absolutely imperative to make sure that people aren't stunned by your response of maybe lack of engagement at the moment.
Any other of our panelists have a view on that?
I can jump in and say I was really surprised when I had some difficult conversations last month with my agency around having to really reduce budgets for the time being, for the next months anyway. And I explained the logic to them. They took it extremely professionally and actually kind of volunteered to continue to try to keep a lot of account activity going and to sort of kind of go above and beyond things to kind of at least keep the engine running while we try to get through this phase. And so I think that, I'm not saying anyone needs to do free work or volunteer their services for not a fair cost, but I think they're making it really hard for me to not fight for them really hard when we come out of this and budgets are looser again. I can guarantee these guys are going to get a lot of my work, and I'm going to be fighting hard to get them more budget because they've shown so much willingness to understand flexibility, collaboration, to do more when I'm giving them less. And so I've been pleasantly just super impressed, actually. So that's a nice positive in this, and I hope we can move beyond it so they can reap the benefits very soon.
I mean, I'm constantly stunned by people's reactions to anything. I always think like surely the Marcomms way is the best way. I would probably argue if I was stunned just in my own position, and the times I have been has probably been when I haven't done my homework on what their expectations were. That said, don't be completely fooled, because there's a lot of management play out there to keep you on your feet in order to just kind of throw you a speedball or a curveball that you weren't expecting. Yeah, I think I'd just say focus to what, probe a little bit more into what they actually needed. I think I completely concur with, you've got kind of two types of people that come out in times like this. You've got people who get, and this comes to agencies as well, you've got an in-house, you've got people who understand a crisis and the need to perhaps to go above and beyond and to change. And you've got other people who don't like change. And I'm not saying those people don't come with value. A lot of those people have fantastic value, but maybe not right now. So it really depends on how you play those resources as well. So I mentioned earlier about some people who are not necessarily thrive in the lead generation measurement world. I would encourage them, and I always do, to kind of step out of your comfort zone and start going elsewhere. So for example, a lot of my work around lead generation and measurement was pretty much sorted and rolling by about March this year. And the pivot I've now made is actually, I've been asked to work on kind of more the commercial proposition. So actually the board is asking me, which did stun me, to actually then write the new service, the new normal service proposition. And if my heart isn't necessarily in that. I love my Marcomms arena, but I have to take it, if I sit back, as a compliment that you get it, you need to grow. And it's made me think I should actually offer that help to do other things. And I think the same thing goes for agencies. That flexibility will really get you through.
Definitely. I think there's also a point that, and I kind of made that point in my sort of brief summary earlier, is that there's some very that people might have had a secure and stable model, that was it, that's going to take them through right to the end. And I think that when we're seeing some of those stable models eradicated, I think, Nick, you made a really good point there about saying that those who don't like change, those are the people who are passively really struggling to say, look, I need to put that bit down and I need to move on to what is a new framework for my business. And I talked to a business owner yesterday, owner manager, talking about the great burden of where things are at the moment. But she said, I've kind of done my grieving bit. I've kind of got over it. We've had a small funeral. We've now got a new birth of what it is. And I've got a new purpose. I wasn't expecting it, but I really want to get on with it. And it's been the best thing I could have done. So I think that some of that behavior that boards can demonstrate, especially when you're answering to a large board, might be that you might need to bring some other people on that journey with you. As Nick said, you've maybe got a new service proposition that you've really got to completely pivot and go in a different direction. And I think that's been particularly hard by for some business owners to really say, look, I've got to rethink, particularly for somebody who's been in business for a long time, maybe went through the recession earlier. They're kind of, here we go again, but it is different, I guess. And I think we've got to think about how the approach of an agency comes at that is again, this is just all about being aligned and understand your client and asking questions. The thing that surprised me most, I think, about the reactions between agencies and clients recently, and I get a bit of feedback I get because I'm sitting in quite a lovely neutral place in France, I'm sure you hear it, is I wish they'd ask me more questions. If they asked me, I would tell them. I'm not necessarily going to volunteer because I'm not quite sure what they want to know. And I think that's been really critical. That's kind of marketing 101. Ask your client a question. They love to be asked questions. They want to understand what you need to do your job better. And I think what Chris F was saying about how his agency have been really proactive, asking more questions. What can we do for you? If we did this for you, would it make a difference? Just go and ask. And I think this also comes back into areas like payment terms moving forward. I've raised payment terms with the Ad Association again this morning. We've got to go and have some more grown-up conversations. We're not very good at asking for money in this country at times, and we'll often rush off and go and do that work for the POs in place. I think this is, we have a permission to behave differently and honestly and transparently. We've seen this in amazing collaboration recently, and a long way it can continue, but ask more questions. These guys want to know, and it will help them in the long term.
So Paul's put out a call for any final questions as we reach the end of the session. We've got one from Sarah Donnelly saying, agencies often refer to themselves as an extension of your marketing team. They certainly do. In reality, what does that mean to in-house marketing leaders, and how do agencies truly support achieving and showing value to the board?
I can start. My PR agency is absolutely an extension of my team. They're a critical investment. They've delivered a tremendous amount of value. One of the ways kind of before the crisis and lockdown, I positioned them well, I give them direct access to a lot of my SMEs that I trust. So they go right to my people, kind of, as we do our quarterly planning and agree on topics and spokespeople, and I give them direct access to them. So they kind of can build that relationship on the front lines, and it helps my cause as well. So of course, maybe it's not so easy to institute that right now, but it's a key part of my team. I think how else to build that, constantly beating your chest, I think, and showing the things you guys are delivering. Don't be shy. Give your client side marketing director guy or gal anything he needs to self-promote his capability across the organization as well. I think this is a great time for that, especially as we all become perhaps a bit more internally focused.
And we have a question from Kerry Worrell again. How can you define the effect on the bottom line of good media relations work that protects the company's reputation? And it's pretty obvious to me that some companies' reputations have prospered over the last few months, and some have done considerably less well. So how do we demonstrate the effect on the bottom line of good media relations?
I'm jumping up and down virtually to answer this one. I actually have Suzanne with us on the call, who's the head of PR for my company. And myself and Suzanne are in partnership. So if you're not already in partnership with your marketing peers in an organization, then now's the time to maybe focus on that. So everything that we push out from a PR perspective, we always question, how are we going to measure the success of this? So this could be something as simple, you may be protecting the reputation of the organization from what you're doing, but always have a link. It seems simple, but always have a link to go and read more or find out more, and then make sure your marketing people know how to track who's coming through that traffic. So I have successfully tracked in the past, or we have successfully tracked in the past, PR that has led to new sales inquiries, whatever we've been measuring at the time. It could be even we wanted to download a paper or whatever, and we've actually managed to track that whole kind of pipeline coming through, and that's something that I was able to help Suzanne achieve as part of her PR agenda, and then it connects the two things together.
I think it's just to probably add to that one. I think this is where you're going to be able to pick up some of those threads, and also help your board articulate them as well. I think Chris, after you just mentioned about that kind of helping your colleagues make them famous and bring in some of those different areas. I think if the board is able to be fed some of the information that has the cause and effect behind it, then that really helps articulate and advocate some of the messages that you might need to get across. Because I think if we've talked about it a lot already today. Sometimes PR and marketing can be picked off so easily because there just is a lack of understanding about what the value add actually brings in the long term. So I think making that very clear to say, look, this particular piece of information is going to have an impact here, and this is what we believe the result is going to be, and this is why we need you to get behind that idea. So I think this is about your advocacy with the board, helping them understand. I also think it's going to be about how we use the data that comes from it as well. And I think there was some quite interesting results that were coming out of the DMA recently about that, generally we don't trust, customers don't trust necessarily the data. And I think our view on trust on data might actually be quite interesting, influenced by the new track and trace system actually. And I think, well, how are we going to build that trust on what actually works? Does the data actually do the job for you? So I think when we're having a look at that reputational piece, some of this is going to be linked into data, and also possibly rediscovering channels that were going to become more important, like direct mail. So I had a session with the DMA and Whistle recently to talk about the joy of direct mail, because I've got people I'm working with now who've rediscovered it, because it's going to be a very important channel. While we're all still sitting at home, we're going to be coming out of home. This has actually become a much more important place where we're going to be absorbing messages. How can we talk about some of the value add there? So I think there's a real chance to, I think, as you say, align partnership, making sure that everybody understands where the journey is heading, even if it's in short-term stages at the moment.
Well, I think that leads us really to wrapping up time, and I'll hand over to Paul in a moment. I just wanted to thank our four fantastic panelists. From the first session, I suddenly took out the importance of building alliances, of not hiding, because the CFO will find you, and of providing options to the board and giving them a range of different outcomes. And from the second, I thought the line about there's been a small funeral and now there's a new birth was a very good way of putting it, actually. And then Nick's emphasis on measuring stuff at every level was incredibly welcome. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you for allowing me to moderate this. The PRCA is delighted our Marcomms Group is in such good health. And I'll hand you over to Paul.
Thank you, Francis. Just a few very quick thank yous. Francis, thank you for moderating an excellent job. Big thank you to the Marcomms team who made this happen. This is our first event, and there was a huge amount of effort has gone into making this happen. I thought the speakers delivered some wonderful insight, and thank you to them. But mostly thank you to you guys for joining us. Don't forget that this session will be available online. We're also going to publish a blog. There's a bunch of handy tips that we're going to send out, and there's also an article in Just Marketing. So there's going to be lots of ways for you to access this information. If you aren't already, please do join our Marcomms group. You would be more than welcome. As I say, it's for everybody, agency side, client side, CEO to account exec. And in terms of planning our next session, we'd like to know what you would like, because this group is for you. So there are some suggestions around discussing regulation, discussing measurement, which we've touched on today, the commonality of language between client and agency, the understanding of new emerging technologies, and perhaps one on the roles and responsibilities of the internal team versus the agency. So we would welcome your contributions and thoughts on what that next session should look like. I very much hope that we get to do it face to face with a glass in our hand. But in the meantime, thank you again, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.